Welcome to Chess News number 40. In this episode I want to take a closer look at Magnus Carlsen's performance in Nanjing, the Pearl Spring tournament that he played in there recently. So I'm not really going in depth this time, but rather I just want to take a look at some of the fragments of his wins. And he managed to win no less than 6 games and he drew 4. So let's start immediately with the position in the diagram. This is from the game he played with the white pieces against Wang Yue, the local hero from China. Now, players had played a very interesting and also up and down game. They played a Slav defense that was used on many occasions during the World Championship matches between Alichin and O in 35 and 37 of the previous century. And in more recent days, this line has been rehabilitated by Morozevich. And, well, in this game, it was Wang Yue's choice to defend himself. And I think he did a very good job. Because at a certain moment he had a large advantage, but he didn't really capitalize on it. And then the game switched into Magnus's favor, but also Magnus didn't really capitalize. And then, when they both made the time control, they got into this end game where White had a tiny advantage and could play for a win, but where Wang Yue has managed to maneuver his pieces in such a way that now he is ready to sacrifice at least one of his pieces for the last remaining pawns of White in the center. So Carlsen's last move was rook to h1, and now it's Wang Yue to move, and he starts sacrificing his bishop here. Bishop takes e5. Well, Carlsen takes that bishop, and now knight takes e5 follows. And the point of this is that after knight d6 check and king a6, which is the only move, otherwise you get all kinds of forks or checks, you can check that yourself. The idea is that now after knight takes e5, when White would be up 2 pieces, Wang Yue would of course regain one of the knights with rook e3 check. And after king d2 and rook takes e5, he would have reached the position he was envisaging earlier with the sacrifice. Of course, this position should be drawn, even if you take off both black pawns and you defend correctly with black, rook and knight will not be able to win from the rook alone. So, of course, Carlsen realized this, and I think this is where we see his superb fighting mentality, which is one of the characteristics and also one of the things responsible for his playing strengths. Even in this late hour, because I think they were playing with a different time control, not the classical time control, but I think they were certainly in the 4th hour or play or so. So even then, after bishop takes e5 and f takes e5 and knight takes e5 and knight d6 check, after king a6 he didn't take the knight because he realized that that would just only be an exchange of knights, but rather he found a way to continue the battle. And even though it's maybe not objectively, according to the computers and engines and what have you, the best move, it certainly is the best move, or one of the best moves, to keep the fight going for just that little bit longer. And can you imagine how frustrating it must have been for Wang Yue that Carlsen didn't go for knight e5 and rook e3, etc., etc., which would most likely lead to a draw, but instead went for knight b4 check. Now, if the king goes down and attacks that knight, king a5, then you have knight c6. Let's just play that move here for a moment. And after knight takes c6, it would be possible to play knight c4, forking the rook. But after king a4, of course it doesn't really matter so much for White that White is now winning the exchange, because after king a3 it is still a drawn position. But Wang Yue did not play king h5 there, but rather after knight b4 check he went for king b6. And I suppose that gave Magnus some chances, even though, objectively speaking, nothing is wrong yet. The big thing is that now, instead of exchanging a pair of knights, he still has 2 knights and a rook to give Black's king a hard time. And this asks more of the defensive side than the case in which 2 knights would be exchanged. So now Magnus played rook c1, just making sure that the king remains trapped here and cannot cross the Rubicon, the c file, so it has to stay on the queen side. And now it is up to Wang Yue to find a good move here. Well, I suppose he had a number of moves, and the move that he chose was not bad. Rook e3 check he played here. And Magnus now went king d1. And the strangest thing is that now there is really only one good move for Black. The thing is that White is threatening here knight d5, winning the rook. So even though it was nice to give this check on e3, because you just live another move, now you have to make sure that your rook does not get lost on e3, right? So, if Wang Yue had played here king a5, he still would have had chances to survive the game. But unfortunately he didn't find it, and he thought that rook b3 was safe enough. But it turns out that the rook is very vulnerably placed on b3, and it's really kudos to Magnus Carlsen here that he somehow managed to find the one and only way to keep the game going, and that he really presented Wang Yue with enough problems, and that indeed Wang Yue find a way to go wrong, so that Carlsen could win the game in the end. Now he plays knight d5, taking over the initiative, and of course the king now has to back up, because these knights are sitting next to each other, so they're controlling a nice lot of squares here, and of course the c file is also not accessible for Black's king, so the king has to go to a7. If he goes to a5 or a6, you can check that yourself. Then we play rook a1 check, and then the black rook has to go in between, and then after rook takes a3, it is simply checkmate. You can see how beautifully these 2 knights, and I stress 2 knights, are working together. None of this would have been possible if he had exchanged one pair of knights. So king a7 is really the only move not to be mated immediately. But the king hunt continues now with rook a1 check. And the only move here is king b8. And here comes the very subtle and silent point, king c2. And as it turns out, the rook has no squares to go to on the b file. And it is very probable that Wang Yue missed this when he started with rook e3 check, or a move later when he returned his rook to b3. So now he was forced to move horizontally, and well, he decided to put the rook all the way on h3. But the thing is that now the b file has become available for White to start hunting the king again. And now the king has to go back to the a file, and now White is able to hunt the king from b7. Now, of course, it is not possible to play king a8, because then knight b6 is checkmate. So the king has to come up. And now Magnus plays in such a way that Black is going to lose at least his knight. Now, rook b6 is played. After king a7, knight b5 check. King a8, knight dc7 is checkmate. So he has to move up the king like so. Well, here came the check with the rook to b5. And now we're not only attacking the king, but also indirectly the knight on e5, And this is the beauty of the fact that you can just keep harassing the king over the b file that had become available since Black had to retreat the rook from the b file. He had to give up the defense of the b file here. King a6 again leads to mate after knight c7 check. King a7 and knight c8. That's a very nice mating pattern. So in the game, king a4 was played, and now there was just, well, you could say a rather simple discovered check here with knight b6. And just see again how beautifully these knights are working together with the rook. This guy is just protecting the rook. The rook itself is taking away these squares from the king. This knight is checking the king, so it's forcing the king to a3. And hey, now because of the discovered attack, we can take the knight on e5. And this is of course a winning position. And here Wang Yue resigned. So this was a very interesting fighting game with lots of up and downs, but in the end a very deserved win for Carlsen, because he really played fighting chess with this move knight b4. I think this was the most impressive move he played throughout the tournament, well, at least from where I'm sitting, because this is how you do it. You know, you just keep producing problems for your opponent, and well, in the end, it just turns out that with these two knights and the rook, you have so many attacking chances that black needs to play very, very, very carefully. And Wang Yue just didn't find the maze through the net here. Okay, so let's go on to the next excuse me, game. And this fragment is from Carlsen's win with the white pieces against Topalov. This was from the second round. And they have played a King's Indian defense, which Topalov plays on other occasions also. But we don't see it that often, apart from Rajabov's games, I suppose, in top-level tournaments such as these. And now I was really surprised by Topalov's move, because first of all, he puts a knight in the corner with knight a8. And I don't know, maybe his idea was to move the b pawn, or move the knight to c7, and then maybe to b5 or something like that. You know, this could be an idea, just to reroute the knight like so. But, well, a knight on the rim is dim, and a knight in the corner is blah 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 orner. I don't know any rhyming word for that. But I think he should have set tight here with such moves as rook e8, or bishop e7, or rook c7. Because, I don't know, putting a knight in the corner like that, you know, for strategic considerations, that's not so nice, even though the position is closed and he has a clear route for his knight. But most importantly, of course, this knight is one of the defenders of the a-pawn. Now, we can expect Topalov to realize that after knight e8 he's going to lose a pawn, yeah? So he must have thought, I'm going to sacrifice this pawn, because that's the terms these guys are thinking in. But sacrificing a pawn with knight a8 in this situation, it doesn't really make sense to me. So after bishop takes c5, the very logical move, and rook takes c5, Magnus now just chopped off this extra pawn, queen takes a4, and, well, Topalov started looking for some compensation here and attacking chances, quote unquote, with queen c8. But of course, after rook c1, Magnus was very, very solid, and also because of the fact that he has some space advantage, he was able to very easily switch his pieces from the queen side to the king side and to the queen side and back to the king side, and he just started rolling up Topalov on the king side there. So I don't think that this is the kind of advantage you can allow your opponent on this top level. So, in my eye, this was not a very good game from Carlsen, but rather a weak game from Topalov, even though we really must congratulate Carlsen with his technique, because he really managed to win this game in quite, well, a convincing way. But I suppose that's also because of the position. His position is just a lot better. So, yeah, that's why you cannot really do it on that top level. if you give these guys one finger, they just take the whole hand, you know. So if you give him the pawn on a4, and he also has a space advantage, and black still has a bad bishop, you know, you can be quite sure that these guys are going to convert the advantage, unless they may just make a huge mistake or whatever. But that didn't happen. So that was quite an easy win for Carlsen, I would say. So let's go on to the next one. Yeah, let me see. Okay, here he was playing the white pieces in the 5th round against Rajabov, and I believe they played this type of opening earlier. But now Rajabov decided to play in a different way. Let me just go through these opening moves rather quickly. It is a Rossolimo Sicilian, you know, with bishop b5 on the 3rd move. But the thing is that in this position, Rajabov still isn't castled. This guy is still sitting in the center, and even though his rooks are not connected and whites are also not connected, white's king is at least safe, and it's more realistic and more easy for whites to make his pieces work together and connect his heavy pieces. So I think that's why Rajabov's next move, knight b4, even though it does hit some of these central positions in white's camp, is a little bit too optimistic, because I really don't think you can start attacking when your house is still a little bit on fire, meaning in this case your bishop is still on f8 and you haven't castled yet, and yeah, your king is still between your rooks. In white's camp the rooks are also not connected, but at least the king is not in between, and the queen is also providing some connection between white's rooks, only the bishop is in the way, of course. Well, here bishop b3 was played, and after bishop takes e4 and d takes e4, of course this now has become a weakness, but it is still quite solidly protected. But more importantly, there is now an attack on the knight on f4, of course. So Rajabov played knight f to d3, but he's taking quite a lot of hay on his fork here, I would say. Now these knights are attacking each other, and even though they look like big octopuses in the middle of white's position, also both knights have trouble moving, unless you want this knight to snatch off the bishop on c1, which would connect white's heavy pieces, of course, but would also remove this knight from the board. And this knight had a big career, you know, this knight from d3. It came from f4, and before that, if I'm not mistaken, it came from d5, from f6, from g8. And Nimzowitsch used to call this a tempo schlucker, you know. So a move or a knight that makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves, only to exchange itself for an undeveloped white piece. Well, let's see what happened. Bishop g5. Carlsen didn't even want nothing of it. He thinks his bishop is more worth than that knight, and he's developing it with tempo, and also now his pieces are, his heavy pieces are connected on the first rank. So now rook c8 was played, and I suppose here comes, well, the first sign that maybe black's play is backfiring on him, because for the moment white is a pawn up, and yeah, you can snatch it off with knight takes e5 again, but it really looks like you're just keeping your house from drowning. Okay, well, in the game Rajabov played knight takes b2, a very dangerous move to play your knight up in the camp so far, but his idea was after queen e2 to go to c4. But now really white's position comes in full swing here with rook fc1. All of white's pieces are actively placed. They're exerting pressure here along this diagonal on these two pieces. There is also a pin now of the knight along the c file. You know, this guy is unprotected. This is very nasty. The king is still in the center. Under certain circumstances, of course, such a move as rook a5 is possible. And Yeah, white already has a very serious advantage here. And this is then also the moment where Radjabov goes wrong. He plays bishop c5, and he allows now for a nice combination. Carlsen now plays knight takes b5, and he is attacking the knight on c4, which is no longer protected by the rook because the bishop is in the way. Now I suppose the most tough defense was bishop takes f2, which allows for a renewed defense of the knight here. When after queen takes f2, black has queen takes b5, but still after rook takes a5, it turns out that white has a nice advantage, because he's now making use of the fact that the knight on c4 is still pinned. And, well, where does the queen go? I suppose maybe you can go to... Well, if you go to b7, then maybe knight c5 is coming, so let's try rook b8. But then maybe you have this kind of attack. Anyway, it would just appear that white has different ways, different ideas of continuing his advantage here, his initiative. So, but maybe that was tougher, this bishop takes f2, than what Radjabov played in the game. After knight takes b5, he castled, allowing for an immediate finish here, because now Carlsen takes out the black squares. Knight takes c5, and after knight takes e5, which was played in the game, he now also played bishop e5, attacking the rook, and simultaneously also attacking, defending his knight on e5. And, well, you could say, okay, let's just chase the bishop ourselves, you know. But after knight d6, white is also now forking both rooks and will emerge with a material advantage. So I suppose that Carlsen was also very happy with Radjabov's play there, who was playing really a bit too optimistic, I guess, allowing for a complete development of the white forces and a nice tactical blow in the end. Okay, so let's go on to the next game. This is from the first round, where Carlsen played with white against Peter Leko. And probably the opening was inspired on Garry Kasparov's earlier repertoire, who popularized the Scotch opening. And in this case, Carlsen has played some kind of a gambit line, because he's a pawn down, but he does have the pair of the bishops, and he also has some very nice targets on black's queen side. Most notably, this guy here is weak, right? And if the bishop develops from c8, then this guy is also weak. And apart from that, it is much more difficult for black to start attacking something, because white's pieces are much more active and can attack black's weaknesses more easily than the other way around. And I suppose that's also the reason why Leko resorted to a poor looking move here. Maybe he didn't really know what to play, so he went for king h8. But here Carlsen really took the initiative with rook c1, already putting his rook on the half-open c-file, attacking the weakness on c7. And now Leko decided just to develop this bishop a little bit, and Carlsen just stepped up the pressure. Now he's now overprotecting d5, or as Nimzowitsch would say, Überdeckung. And this also makes it all the more difficult for black to somehow maybe liberate or free himself with the c7, c6 move, which could have been one of the ideas of bishop c6. So he went for rook ac8, you know, just preparing for a tough defense. But here came queen b3, and the queen is now hitting this weakness, of course. Okay, well, Leko is still defending with b5, but now you can imagine that this guy has become weak, and this square has become weak. So, here goes Carlsen. He just wants to jump into c6 with his knight, you know. And also, of course, the idea of knight to e2 now mechanically opens up really the semi-open c-file for the rook, and also this guy is on the nomination of being attacked. So Leko started looking for some counter chances here against White's king position, but we can also see that White's king position is very solidly defended for the moment with so many pieces around. So knight d4 was played here, and bishop g4 was played. At least Leko is now trying to eliminate White's pair of the bishops, but Carlsen wants nothing of it. He just plays bishop g2, pushing back the black queen. And now he plays a move h4 that I don't really understand. I mean, maybe there were also other good options. Maybe it was good to double up on the c-file, for instance, with rook c2 or rook c3 or something like that, or maybe to play knight c6 to try and remove the knight from e7, so maybe later on a rook can go to c6. So this is a bit of a mysterious move for me. I don't really understand the idea here. Well, maybe some of you guys can leave a comment explaining this move to me. Well, in such a position it is very difficult to defend and find good moves, and Leko went here for knight g8. Maybe he just wanted to reroute somehow the knight to f5, which does make sense because it would be hitting the new weakness on g3, because g3 is of course a weakness after h2, h4. But for the moment, knight g8 does leave the c6 square available for White's pieces, and White jumps in immediately with rook c6, and now he decides to go to f6 rather than to h6, and now of course the pawn on a6 was taken. I mean, black could no longer hold on to his pawns there, and after bishop d7 and knight b5, instead of being a gambit pawn down, Magnus was 2 pawns up, and a little later on he had to stave off a sacrificial attack on his king side, because I believe Leko sacrificed one of his knights on f4 or on h4, but with 2 pawns up and the bishop pair and good coordination between his pieces, he just managed to win this game some 20 moves later. Okay, so I think this was really quite an impressive victory, straight from the opening, which he had prepared quite well, playing an interesting gambit, putting pressure on the queen side. Leko couldn't really do much, and then it was just harvest time for Carlsen, ripping all the fruits, the newly bared fruits on black's queen side. Okay, let's see if we have some more games in store. Yes, we have Carlsen Yakovenko, and this is from the last round. Again, a win with the white pieces. Now, it's very funny. Just days, or was it a week before, Karpov and Kasparov had been playing in Valencia, and Karpov, without exception, had defended himself with this exchange variation of the orthodox Queen's Gambit, and there was an exchange of bishops and exchange of both bishops, I should say, also on d6, and both sides are playing with heavy pieces and a pair of knights. But as we can see, black is trailing. He is trailing, and he is trailing with his development. His king is still in the center, and you know, it's such a pity that it always takes a move to castle. And if that's not enough, there's also this slight weakness on the semi-open c-file here. But if we look at another very important factor, a positional factor in the position, or if we start looking at the imbalances, excuse me, we can see that white has a central pawn majority of 2 versus 1, and that black has a central pawn majority of 3 versus 2 on the queen side here. So it would make sense, I suppose, for black to maybe start moving his pawn majority later on with c6, c5, and for white it would make sense to play f2, f3 and e3, e4 to start moving his pawn majority in the center. But since black is not well developed and white is, it was possible for Carlsen here to do it in an even quicker way, and he played here e4. So without the support of the f-pawn. Now the problem is that after d takes e4, which would be the normal strategic reaction, because you would start pressuring this Isolani on d4 and it could become a weakness, and maybe you would have a strong square on d5, is not good under the given circumstances, because after knight takes e4, white is winning yet another tempo against the, for the moment, poorly placed queen on d6. And thereby is developing quite an important alternative. One of the ideas is, for instance, after queen d5, to play queen a3, which is bearing down on this knight here, which means that black cannot castle. And if black would take this knight, then of course after rook takes e1, white is just crushing through on the e7 square here. So that's just one of these ideas. So maybe the queen shouldn't go to d7. Well, maybe it should go to b4, you know, to protect against the queen a3 idea. But then white has other ideas, other things up his sleeve. Maybe he can move knight f to g5, for instance, when after castles he can now unleash some power against the h7 pawn with knight c5. So white has just too much activity with his better developed pieces, and there is play against these weak knights on d7 and on e7. So that's why after e4 Jakovenko couldn't really exchange and had to allow, after castles, the immediate advance of white's pawn majority in the center. So Carlsen kind of for free got all of a sudden this space advantage, and the space advantage and the attack on the queen now, and the realization of his pawn majority. And black, even though he has castled, is still looking a little bit silly with these two knights and his undeveloped queen pawn majority. Okay. So queen e6 was played here, and here rook a e1 came, so this is already indirectly looking at the king, also not very nice. And if now c5, for instance, trying just to make that pawn majority work also, then it has the disadvantage that it allows for knight b5 to d6, because now d6 has become a strong square since it is supported by the e5 pawn, right? So after rook a1, rook f e8 was played, but here Carlsen prepares to move his f pawn. You know, this is a really a battery ram, a storm ram. If he can somehow move up his f pawn also, he'll just be crushing black there on the king side. So knight g6 was played, maybe nice to try and exchange at least one of these passive knights. And Carlsen obliged, because if he takes, black must recapture, and then now he does have the move later when the pawn appears on f4, because when the pawn appears on f4, then again it is threatening to take the queen. So now he wants to maintain his attacking chances, so he keeps the queens on the board, queen e2. And now black starts preparing maybe for some blockage here on the white squares with knight f8, but f4 comes anyway. And maybe things would not have been so bad here. I mean, white does have the advantage, but it's not winning immediately or something. Maybe it was possible here to go f5. You know? And then just put your knight here and see what happens. Okay, white has a protected passed pawn, but black's knight would also be exerting some pressure, you know, on these pawns here, and it would support the c5 pawn break. Now, if white would take that pawn en passant, then he is really breaking his pawn majority in the center, and he's also giving up his space advantage. So after queen takes f6, I think black would have had the worst. So f5 was an option there. But instead of f5 he played queen f5. And now Carlsen quite nicely rerouted the knight, so that the knight will again chase away the queen, after which f4, f5 would become a possibility. f6 was now played. And maybe that was also not the best move. Anyway, well, let's not go too deep, because knight e3 now gains the tempo. And after queen d7, queen d3 was played. And after f takes e5 and d takes e5, Magnus had a very mobile pawn duo here, which was more mobile than black's. For instance, because of the pressure that white already has against the d5 pawns here, and also because of the fact that his knight is better, and that both of his rooks are more actively placed. And he already has a significant advantage and managed to win the game in the end. Okay, that was his last win in the last round. Put him well on top. Also brought him over the all-famous 2800 ELO barrier. So congratulations to Magnus. I think we are round... Oh, no, yeah, I think this was... Let me just quickly check. Yeah, this was the last win. Yeah, my chess-based program is making a weird sort of it. Yeah, this was from the 4th round against Yakovenko, where Magnus won a game with the black pieces. Also, he had been playing the Najdorf here, so the Kasparov repertoire, Kasparov with whom he's been training of late. But here Carlsen goes wrong, and he plays bishop takes e3, where rook takes e3 would have been better, just to take control, or to maintain control of the e-file at least. Because after bishop e3, now all of a sudden he is in a very nasty pin, and the advantage switches from black side to white side. So Yakovenko is better here. And now of course his bishop is attacked, and Carlsen must defend. And immediately in time trouble, Yakovenko plays c5 in order to break through, possibly break through, with a very strong pass pawn here. Well, he didn't want to allow c takes d6 or c5 c6, so Carlsen takes, and here comes the pawn, d6. And now, of course, his rook on e8 is vulnerable, but he must also deal with the free d-pawn, so he plays rook e6, and he's just in time after d7 to play bishop g5. So now the bishop defends against this pawn, and for the moment he's also attacking the queen here. But the queen goes to d1 and is now threatening to promote the pawn. So bishop d8 was really necessary, just blocking the promotion of the pawn there. And Yakovenko now just regains the pawn with rook takes c5. But as it turns out, this pawn on d7 is not so easy to promote. It's also not so easy to start attacking the d8 square, because black has sufficient defense for the black squares there. And Yakovenko, as it turns out, I say it again, must really start worrying about his pawn. And maybe he worries a little bit too much, because he started making some inaccuracies from this moment on. So queen f8 was played, and now of course this queen is attacking the rook, and it made the most sense to stay on the c file, but now he's going to d5, because from the c file you always have the option, you know, of attacking the bishop and also pinning queen and king on the same rank. But he went to d5, and from d5, well, you can't go through your own pawn, right? Maybe he just wanted to keep this pawn protected. But after rook c4 and bishop takes a5, I think that would be kind of dangerous, because now you do get this rook c8 in with tempo. And after bishop d8, okay, black is up a pawn, but white's pieces are quite aggressively placed. And yeah, maybe he can start putting some more pressure on the bishop on d8. Anyway, rook d5 was played, and now Carlsen started harassing Yakovenko a little bit again with his own queen, because for the moment everything is fine, you know. The blockade on d8 is there, so he now starts harassing these pawns here again. So b3 was played. Everything is still kind of protected here. And now rook e3 was played, attacking here, and of course this weakness on b2. Knight d2 was played. And now queen c3 was played. Maybe with the idea of playing rook d3, you know, pinning the knight and maybe removing the rook from d5, which is an important defender of the pawn on a5 and the pawn on d7. Well, knight f3 was played here. And yeah, it was possible now maybe to take on b3, but Carlsen decided to repeat the moves. I don't really know why. They already had reached the time control. And after knight e2, he now went to f4. And again, knight f3 was played and rook c3 was played. So I don't really know. They're just fooling around a little bit with each other here. And okay, now this is a bit of a nasty move, I suppose. I guess White wants to check on e8, but queen d3 blocks that. And now the queens come off, which makes Black's king a little bit more active. And now this pawn really is becoming a serious weakness, because with the queens off, the king can start attacking that pawn. And also, White's king is still very much in the corner and subject to nasty checks along the first rank. So maybe it would have made sense to play king g1 here, but somehow Yakovenko just didn't want to play this move, and he played rook d4 here, just giving up a tempo, it appears. And after king f8, Black really has an endgame advantage here. Rook b4 was played to attack the pawn on b7, but again, I think he should have done something about the predicament of the white king on h1 with g1, because after rook b4, it turns out that after rook d3 and rook b1, rook d1, White is forced to very uglily pin his knight himself with knight g1. And, okay, White is now a pawn up, but Carlsen immediately snatches off the pawn on a5, and, of course, now wants to bring his bishop somehow to this diagonal to win the knight on g1. So, finally, White makes love for his king now with g4. But here goes king e7, supervising the d7 promotion pawn, and after king g2 and rook takes d7, Black is up a pawn, and here he managed to, well, quite simply win the bishop versus knight endgame with an extra pawn up. So, yeah, also a little bit an up and down game, but I suppose Carlsen just had the better nerves, realized what was going on better than Yakovenko again, and, well, played very well there in time trouble, and also after time trouble. Well, that really ends the streak of 6 winning games and the fragments that I wanted to show you. Maybe you've seen the article on ChessBase that was written by Jeff Sonas, who has done some research about the best tournament performances. Now, of course, this was not a very long tournament. There have been longer tournaments in history. I suppose that Kasparov played one very impressive tournament in Tilburg, and of course there is the all-time favorite that Karpov played in Linares 1994, and of course the good old guys like Tal and Lasker in their ages, and some others played much more lengthy tournaments, and also the time control was a little bit different. And I have the feeling that in some games the opponents were a little bit nice to Carlsen. Or was it the hypnotical influence of the student of Kasparov doing the work here? I don't know. The magician's apprentice, right? The sorcerer's apprentice, we could say, using some of his magic spell on his opponents. Anyway, very interesting tournament victory, bringing Magnus Carlsen over the 2800 ELO barrier. I guess we all like to see him grow and finally take that #1 spot in the world rankings. So, I hope you've enjoyed this compilation. This is Waldemar signing off. I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.